Okay. So we'll see if we get any other people on, but this recording will be available for anybody who wants it. Also, if you need to leave early or whatever, feel free to do that, and I'll send out a link to this later. But if I haven't met you, and I might have met everybody, I'm not sure. I'm Ronya. I'm presenting today on behalf of Emerge ACT. So we're the kind of part of arthritis pain support and Emerge ACT that deals with supporting people with ME/CFS, fibromyalgia, long COVID, and conditions that go along with those conditions. So today, this talk is going to be about applying for the disability support pension. I've tailored it to those conditions, but the information in this presentation you can also use for any application for the DSP for any other condition that you might have as well. Um, Applying with these conditions can be quite a daunting process, so hopefully this helps clear things up. It is going to be a long presentation today. It could take up to an hour, which is going to be a long time for people to concentrate, I'm sure. So I'll allow a 3-minute break every 15 to 20 minutes as we go along. And also if you feel like you're kind of at capacity and you need to leave, feel free to do that. And you can watch back the recording at any other given time as well. I just ask that you mute during the presentation so that you don't pop up on the recording, but we'll have an opportunity for questions and discussion at the end of the presentation. So if we're going through things and you're kind of like, oh, I think I have a question about this thing, you'll feel free to write it in the chat function on Zoom, and we'll go through the chat at the end as well. And then just through the discussion, I ask that you be respectful of other people. So I just want to begin this presentation with an acknowledgement of country. I'm recording and presenting on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, but I also want to acknowledge any of the traditional owners and custodians of the lands across Australia, wherever you're watching this from. And I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. So just to give you a bit of an overview about what we'll be discussing today, I'll first of all talk about what is the disability support pension and why could it be useful? Who qualifies? So what are the eligibility criteria for the DSP? The general medical rules and evidence that you might be required to submit. Then I'll talk about the application process itself, so how to apply. When you get the DSP, what happens? Sometimes there are specific rules for certain people after you've been accepted to the DSP, so we'll talk about that. I'll share links to resources for your own applications, and then we'll have our discussion and Q&A. So what is the disability support pension or the DSP? I'm sure if you're watching this, you probably have a bit of an idea. But it's a long-term income support. So long-term meaning it typically doesn't have an end to it. From Services Australia for somebody who has a disability or medical condition that is likely to persist for more than 2 years, so is semi-permanent, and means that you cannot work for 15 hours or more per week. There are lots of benefits of getting onto the DSP. People typically apply for the DSP when they're struggling to hold down very minor hours at work or are completely unable to work due to their disability. And that can cause significant financial hardship. So this payment is there to help those people. So a benefit is that it's a regular income. The rates can vary a little bit depending on your circumstances, but as of the beginning of 2026, you can get up to about $1,180 per fortnight for a single person. on the DSP. The DSP comes with a pension card, and with a pension card comes lots of access to concessions. So discounts on medications, council rates, electricity, public transport, etc. So it's not just the income, but you also get the benefits of a pension card. It's a permanent payment with some asterisks around that. You'll only lose the DSP if you no longer meet the income or medical requirements. So as long as you continue to meet those, you could have the DSP for life. And you can also access some other forms of support on top of it. So for instance, you can have NDIS as well as the disability pension. However, the DSP might not be the most appropriate form of income for a range of reasons. Some of the cons include that there are very, very strict criteria. So if you're undiagnosed, if you're working more than 15 hours per week, or if you have an unsupportive healthcare team who are unwilling to write up reports for you, it might not be possible to get. There is a lengthy and detailed application process. It takes quite a lot of time and energy to be able to understand what the application process looks like, what you need for it, and then to actually write it up yourself. And unfortunately, there is always a possibility of rejection in the first instance. There are some ongoing requirements once you're on the disability support pension. For instance, and this might be more of an issue for some people than others. I find the international travel restrictions difficult. You can only leave the country for 4 to 6 weeks in a year's period. And given that I have family overseas, sometimes that's a bit frustrating. There can be work or study requirements for people under the age of 35 years. And if you are still working on the DSP, you will need to report your income fortnightly. So there is still some maintenance administration once you're on there. And then also some other forms of income support might be more suitable to your individual circumstances. So it might be worth looking into the total and permanent disability payments through your superannuation rather than going down the DSP route, depending on your eligibility criteria. So talking of eligibility, who qualifies for the DSP? There are some age, residence, and income and assets rules around getting the DSP. So you do need to be at least 15 years and 9 months to apply and 16 years of age to be able to receive the disability support pension. And unfortunately, if you've already reached the pension age, which is 67 currently, I believe, then you are ineligible for the disability support pension, and instead you will need to apply for the age pension. And you also need to be a current Australian resident, so either a citizen or a permanent visa holder and have been in residence for at least the last 10 years, with no breaks in residency in the last 5 years. There are some exceptions to this. I would recommend double checking on Centrelink's website for the up-to-date eligibility criteria. And if you have any questions, giving them a call. They should be able to help. There are specific income limits per fortnight that you need to be within. And if you're in a couple, Centrelink will take your spouse's income into account too. So I again recommend checking on Centrelink's website for the up-to-date income limits and how they might apply for you. I've put the current ones there and then also a link here to the specific page to find it. And at the end of the presentation, if you'd like a copy of all these slides, just let me know. I can send that through to you. And then there are also asset limits, and they depend whether you own a home or not, and whether you're single or in a couple. So again, just double check the website for the current limits. So when you apply, your application will consist of your Centrelink application form, which will address those financial, family, and living situations and your general eligibility. And the application form can be printed and completed and then mailed to them. Or if you have a MyGov account, the easiest way is to apply online because you can save a draft of the application form as you're going through. Um, so you'll have your application form and you'll also have medical evidence. Your medical evidence may consist of a comprehensive letter that addresses all the criteria that we're going to be talking about for the rest of the presentation. And that's usually completed by your GP. It could be completed by a specialist or maybe an OT, but usually your GP is going to be the best person to complete that. Any supporting letters or reports from any specialists, allied health, or any kind of medical investigations you've undergone. So things that will back up what is written in that medical letter from your GP. And you can also include a personal statement and or statements of support from employers, teachers, carers about the level of disability you experience and as such your inability to work or study. So those were all of the non-medical rules. If you have fulfilled all of those, then you should be at least initially eligible for the DSP. If you don't fulfill one or more of those non-medical rules, you will unfortunately be ineligible for DSP. But in addition to the non-medical rules, you'll also need to fulfill the medical eligibility criteria too. There are two streams of medical rules. The first one is manifest medical rules, and the second is general medical rules. So manifest medical rules are typically those where there is little to no chance of recovery across the lifespan, and they include things like permanent blindness, requiring nursing home level care, which might actually include some very severe ME/CFS patients, having a terminal illness within the next 2 years, having category 4 HIV/AIDS, and then also a few others. Typically, those with ME/CFS, long COVID, and fibromyalgia will not fulfill those manifest medical rules. So will instead apply under Centrelink's general medical rules. The medical rules for the DSP are that your condition is likely to persist for more than 2 years. Your condition is diagnosed, reasonably treated, and stabilized. You have an impairment rating of 20 points or more, which again we'll talk about. You meet program and support rules if they apply, which we'll talk about. And your condition will stop you working at least 15 hours a week in the next 2 years. So all of those general medical rules I'll go over in this presentation. To demonstrate the general medical rules, you will need that medical evidence in the form of that letter of support or multiple letters from your GP or any treating health professional to address all of the criteria and how you meet them. Now, I think we will take a 3-minute break. So come back at 11:40 or 11:50. And we'll continue onto the general medical rules. Okay. So, Now we'll talk about those general medical rules for the DSP and how to demonstrate that you meet them. And we'll go through each of those medical rules one by one and how to demonstrate that you meet them. So the first one is that your condition or disability is likely to persist more than 2 years. The reality, and some research backs this up as well, is that ME/CFS, we don't 100% know about long COVID, but a lot of people with long COVID fall into the ME/CFS bucket, and fibromyalgia are typically long-term conditions. So you can, in your letter of support from your treating healthcare professional, you can actually quote research showing recovery rates. So things like only 5% of people with ME/CFS who receive that diagnosis will ever fully recover. So you can put that in. You can also address this by stating how long you've already had the condition. So if it's already been 2, 3, 10, 20 years, and that in that time it hasn't really improved, or it hasn't improved enough for you to be able to work. So it is actually unlikely that you're going to improve. You can also demonstrate this by fully addressing the diagnosed, treated, and stabilized criteria, which we'll talk about in a moment. So the second criteria is that due to your condition or disability, you are unlikely to work more than 15 hours per week within the next 2 years. So we know that even mild ME/CFS, long COVID, and fibromyalgia can have a significant effect on ability to work. So how you could demonstrate this is by showing how much you are currently working, and it must be less than 15 hours, and how long you have been working that amount. So for instance, your doctor can put Ronya ceased work in 2024 due to ME/CFS, and has not improved in that period of time. And then also you can address this again. Oh, sorry, I missed one. Here we go. And whether the amount of work that you're doing is actually sustainable at that level. So for instance, I could be doing 10 hours a week of work, which is the absolute maximum that I can be doing. But I could be putting myself into bed because of post-exertional malaise for the next day or two after working that amount. So you can pop in your letter as well. Ronya works 2 3-hour shifts per week, but unfortunately, the day or the 2 days after the 3-hour shift, she's unable to even do basic self-care tasks during that period of time due to post-exertional malaise. You must be diagnosed. So unfortunately, if there is still a bit of uncertainty about the specific condition or disability that you have, you will not fulfill this criteria. So for your condition to be diagnosed, your treating doctor or appropriately qualified health professional, and by appropriately qualified health professional, we mean potentially a specialist in the field of your condition, must have examined and diagnosed your condition, and we need that detailed then in medical evidence. So usually you might need to include a letter from whoever diagnosed your condition, or in the letter from your GP that your GP states that your condition was diagnosed at this time and by such and such, Dr. such and such. If you submit evidence that you are under investigation for other conditions not yet diagnosed, your application will likely be rejected. So in theory, you do not need to have all conditions diagnosed, just the ones that you'll be claiming DSP under. But if you do submit any evidence that you're under investigation for anything else, your application will be rejected. So as an example of fulfilling the diagnosed criteria. Your doctor might have written, Ronya has myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME/CFS. This was diagnosed by exclusion of other conditions, and you can then put these other conditions were investigated by rheumatologist on date. Ronya also has Hashimoto's thyroid disease, which was diagnosed by the GP on date. Typically, ME/CFS can be diagnosed by a GP, and long COVID can also be diagnosed by a GP, although typically with input from other specialists who have investigated and excluded other conditions. Fibromyalgia is typically diagnosed by a rheumatologist. The next criteria is that you must be reasonably treated. So to assess if your condition is reasonably treated, Centrelink will need information about what type of treatment you've had from your doctor or health professional, any current or ongoing treatment, and if you've had, if any other further treatment is planned for you for the next 2 years from the claim. Your evidence should demonstrate the suitability of the previous, current, or future treatment. So is it actually reasonable for you to have undergone the outcomes of the treatment? So has there actually been any improvement? Has it potentially not helped? Have you had side effects and the treatment has been discontinued because of that? If any further treatment is likely to help you get to the stage where you can work more than 15 hours per week. And then is there any medical or other reasons why you can't get specific treatments that might be reasonable for you? So for instance, the cost, if it is prohibitively expensive, that's not reasonable to undertake. Potentially there is no real evidence that it might help you. So for instance, an experimental treatment is potentially not reasonable for you to undertake.
Thank you. I wanted to ask that.
Jade, if you just want to, oh, hang on, just a sec. If you just want to pop any questions into the chat function, I'll go through all of those at the end, just so that you don't pop up on the recording.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Jade. Okay. So an example of showing that you're reasonably treated, we need to keep in mind that there are actually no standardized efficacious treatments for ME/CFS. So your letter from your doctor may quote from research that, for instance, something like graded exercise therapy is not an appropriate treatment because of the potential for harm. You can state any treatments that you have tried and how they have or haven't worked. So for example, Ronya currently takes low-dose naltrexone at 4.5 milligrams per day, which is an off-label treatment for ME/CFS. She tolerates LDN well and has seen a small improvement in her symptoms. However, she is stabilized on LDN and is unable to sustain working more than 10 hours per week due to her ME/CFS. It's just really important to emphasize that treatments have not resulted in the ability to work more 15 or more hours per week. So some possible treatments to include in the letter from your GP might be any current or past medications and what they were for. So you might be on a range of medications, not necessarily just for ME/CFS or anything else, but you might need to include all of that in the letter. Any current or past exercise programs. So it's not appropriate for somebody who's got ME/CFS, but if you have participated in an exercise program, you can put that in and say that you were demonstrating exercise intolerance, or you were not tolerating the exercise program, and it was causing an increase in symptoms and disability. However, if you've got fibromyalgia, there is some evidence to demonstrate that exercise can be an appropriate treatment. So you might need to include potentially that you're seeing an exercise physiologist or something like that in there. So as part of that, any current or past allied health treatments. So for instance, if you're having ongoing massage, dry needling, you're seeing a dietitian, you're seeing a physio for joint mobilizations, all of those sorts of things will be helpful to put in there. But again, just to demonstrate that regardless of all of the treatments that you've undergone, you cannot work 15 or more hours per week. Any current or past psychoeducation or psychotherapy. So if you've seen a counselor or a psychologist, or even if you've kind of participated in group therapy, something like that, you can include that, but emphasize that it was for the emotional aspects or potentially grief or anxiety, and not actually for treating the ME/CFS or fibromyalgia. And then any current or past lifestyle modifications or self-management strategies. So for instance, it's really helpful to put that you've done our self-help course, that you're implementing pacing strategies, and potentially that you've seen an OT for any adjustments. But again, if you haven't done some of these things, you just need to demonstrate that they weren't appropriate for you. And then the criteria of being stabilized. So to assess if your condition is stabilized, Centrelink will need information about whether your ability to work will get better or stay the same with more treatment or rehabilitation within the next 2 years from the claim. So you'll need to demonstrate in the letter from your doctor that either there are no treatments or rehabilitation for your condition, which could be the case in ME/CFS. There's potentially not very many options that we have, or that any current or future planned treatments or rehabilitation are unlikely to improve your condition to where you can work 15 hours or more. You can be getting worse, and sometimes that's a helpful bit of evidence. So stabilized doesn't mean that you're stable, that you're not getting worse. Stabilized just means that you're not likely to get better. So for example, if you're finding working 10 hours per week is resulting in a worsening of capacity, if you can demonstrate that working less, then that will stabilize your condition. You can include that in your medical evidence as well. So again, another example using me. You might include something similar to this in your medical letter. Ronya currently works 10 hours per week and has done so for the last year. She has tried several medications which have not resulted in any substantial increase in her functional capacity. If she exceeds this number of hours working per week, she experiences several days of increased symptoms and worsened functional capacity, resulting in the complete inability to work for the next week. She currently manages his symptoms with a combination of medication, allied health support, and pacing strategies. There are no foreseeable reasonable treatments or interventions that are likely to improve her capacity in the next few years. Okay. I think this is the last, yeah, this is the last main criteria under the medical rules. So you must meet 20 points impairment rating. This is a bit of a weird thing to kind of get your head around, so I recommend again kind of going onto Centrelink's website and having a look at the impairment tables themselves. But Centrelink have impairment tables that show a rating of impairment or disability for several different types of disability. Your impairment is how your disability or medical condition affects your ability to function every day. And they're rated from 0, so no impairment, so a healthy, able-bodied adult, all the way through mild, moderate, severe, and extreme impairment. And they're assigned a number, which are the points. So your medical evidence will need to demonstrate at least 20 points of impairment across multiple tables. But if those 20 points are across multiple tables, then you will need to complete a program of support, which I'll talk about in the next slide or next couple of slides, or 20 points of impairment on one table, in which case you would access the DSP with no need to complete a program of support. So basically the idea is if you are slightly impaired, but not severely, you might be eligible for the DSP, but they will try and get you back to work before allowing you access to the DSP. But if you can demonstrate that you have a severe impairment, then you will be able to access the DSP with no need for a program of support. So my own tips for impairment tables. Read through all of them to see if there is a single table that you may score 20 points on. You may fit multiple, and that's totally fine. I think in my own application, used 3 different tables, but I was able to score 20 points on one of them. So as long as you're able to hit 20 points on one of them, you will get access to the DSP without the program of support. When addressing the impairment tables, it's sometimes helpful to think about what your capacity is like on your worst days, and tailor your medical evidence to those. Your medical evidence from your GP or whoever's writing up your report can actually specifically state the impairment tables that your situation applies to, the possible rating that they would recommend on those tables for you. And then also you want to back it up with a detailed example of how you are eligible for that rating. Typically for ME/CFS and also potentially for fibromyalgia, table 1, the physical exertion and stamina impairment table is going to be the most appropriate one, as it specifically references post-exertional malaise, which is a really nice update. They improved the impairment tables a few years ago, and now they actually have a reference to post-exertional malaise. But there are other ones that are about ability to use your arms and legs and your spine and flexibility and digestion and all sorts of things. So you might be eligible under several different tables. And I've just linked the tables there. Again, I can send these slides to you. So what is a program of support? So a program of support, for if you don't hit 20 points on one single impairment table, it is a program that is supplied through Centrelink that helps people with disability to prepare for, find, and keep a job. And it might include help with job preparation and job search, work experience and training, and injury management. So a program of support will need to be completed prior to the DSP if you score less than 20 points on a single table, and it can take 18 months to complete. So if you're eligible for 20 points on one single table, we want to be able to demonstrate that to avoid the program of support if possible. We are going to take a 3-minute break. That was a lot of information to digest. So if you need to go and have a very quick rest, close your eyes, step away from the computer, I'll meet you back here at 12:13. And yeah, I will be available for half an hour or so after the end of this. I can chat through some questions and things as well. So now that we know uh, the criteria and how you might address them, I'm just going to kind of go through the step by step of how to actually apply for the DSP. So the first step is going to be gathering your medical evidence. And sometimes that might involve actually flagging with your GP or your treating specialist quite a bit in advance saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing the DSP. Would it be something that you would be happy to support me with? How would you like us to do the report? Would you like me to draft the report and bring some information to the session? Sometimes it might, unfortunately, because the report is such an extensive piece of work, sometimes you might need to actually pay for your GP to be able to do it or things like that. So it's nice to be able to flag that you're thinking about applying with your treating health professionals. So for ME/CFS or long COVID, because a GP can diagnose and there are no standardized treatments, you can provide just a GP letter addressing all of those medical rules. That might be sufficient evidence. Um, for fibromyalgia, you could provide a GP letter or whoever has written the report, plus potentially your rheumatologist has just like a couple of lines in a letter confirming the diagnosis and when the diagnosis was made. That should be sufficient. If you have other conditions, they may need letters confirming diagnosis from your treating specialist. So, for example, if you have been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, you might need a letter from your psychologist confirming that diagnosis, potentially a letter from a psychiatrist for ADHD, maybe a letter from a cardiologist for POTS. So, you need to kind of be thinking, okay, who is the most appropriate specialist for this condition? And can I get a letter at least just confirming the diagnosis from them? And then all of the other information can be put into one report by your GP. Because, as I said, writing an extensive report can be a big job for a GP. If they are open to it, you can draft the report with all of your own information and bring the draft to them to adjust or approve. I did that, and my GP was very, very thankful for it. She did read through it and approved it and popped a name and signature and stuff on there. So that is a possibility. There are Facebook groups that can provide examples and support for gathering your medical evidence and applying to the DSP. I know that there is a Facebook group specifically for ME/CFS and the DSP. I think it's actually called that, ME/CFS and the DSP. There might be ones for fibro, things like that as well, because in the past, they have been notorious conditions to get approved under the DSP with. So there's a lot of really, really good information and uh, uh, yeah, information in those groups. Emerge Australia have got a medical evidence template through their applying for the disability support pension module, which is free access on their website. So you could download that and use that kind of as a template for your report. And also there is a website called dsphelp.org.au, which have got really good info on as well. So I highly recommend starting your application as soon as possible, sooner rather than later, even if you haven't got all of your medical evidence yet, because you will be back paid from the date of your application. So from the date that you submit your application, if you get approved, they will pay you the DSP rate from that date of your application submission. Again, it's easiest to apply online, but they do have available a paper form and you can mail it in. You should be able to save the draft online as you're going through until you have all the evidence that you need. Make sure that all of your medical evidence shows that you are diagnosed, treated, and stabilized, and do not submit any evidence that contradicts it. So if, for instance, you get given I don't know, a letter from your rheumatologist who is like, oh, there might be some like future treatments that might really help Ronya out quite a bit. Don't submit that. You will get rejected on the basis of that. So it's really important to have your medical team on board or really tell them, I really can't have any evidence that contradicts that I am stabilized and treated. Um, and then if at any point your application is rejected, you will be able to appeal the decision and submit further evidence. So it's not the end of the world. And I had to appeal. And my second application after I appealed it was approved, and I got backdated the back page from the date of my first application. So they're really quite generous with that as well. So after your application is submitted, if your evidence demonstrates you may be eligible for the DSP and you have fulfilled each of the criterion, your application will progress, and you'll get a notification saying that you may need to attend either a job capacity assessment, sorry, or or a sonic disability medical assessment. You should be able to request to attend these via phone call if going in person is not a possibility for you. A job capacity assessment happens if for some reason your evidence has demonstrated that you were able to work 8 hours or more, or if you are currently working. You'll be contacted by a job capacity assessor who is typically an allied health professional. I think I had a rehabilitation counsellor for mine to check your work capacity is as your evidence demonstrates. And then also the sonic disability medical assessment, you'll be contacted by a medical practitioner, so a doctor, to confirm that your medical circumstances are as your evidence demonstrates. So tips for your work capacity and sonic assessments is, if possible, as much as possible, stick to your medical evidence. Some people have recommended that you actually print out your medical evidence so that you're able to refer to it as you're going through. You really want to be able to focus on demonstrating how severe your disability and functional capacity is. So even if you just write down a few examples of it that you're able to then provide during your interviews, that would be fantastic. And know that you can always have give examples. You can always have a support person with you to help you if you get overwhelmed or tired. And sometimes that can even demonstrate to the assessor, or you actually are quite disabled. You're not able to manage some of these things on your own. And that can be a really good resource as well. Just make sure that your support person has read through your medical evidence so that they are on board with everything as well. And now we wait. So you've applied, you've submitted, you've had all of your assessments. Once your sonic assessment is done, Centrelink will only contact you if, one, they need further evidence, so somehow something's not lining up and they want to double check. you get rejected, and this should only happen if your evidence and your assessments do not line up, or you get approved. Congratulations. If you get rejected, you can request the reason for the rejection from Centrelink, and they will provide a letter to you, usually to your MyGov account or post it out to you, and it will state the reason for the rejection on it. So it may be does not demonstrate that they cannot work 15 hours more per week, blah, blah, blah. You then have 13 weeks to appeal the decision. And once you know the reason for the rejection, you can submit additional evidence that argues with the reason for a rejection when you appeal. If you're rejected a second time, you can appeal via the Administrative Appeals Tribunal again within 13 weeks. And in total, there is no limit on the number of times you can submit a DSP claim. So, for instance, you apply now and you're not fully treated and you're not fully stabilized and you get rejected. In 1 or 2 years' time, you can submit another DSP claim and potentially get on. There are no restrictions around that. So hopefully everything lines up. Sometimes it can take several months to get to the point where you get approval, but when you finally get the DSP, if you're assessed as having no capacity to work, then fantastic. You really don't have anything that you need to do after that. But if you are assessed as having capacity to work, you can get DSP with and without capacity to work. Many people with ME/CFS will not have capacity to work at all. I have some capacity to work, so I was assessed as needing to fulfill obligations. If you're assessed as having capacity to work and it's incorrect, you will need to appeal that decision. And potentially submit some more medical evidence. But if they assess you as having capacity to work and that is correct, there are some additional things to note. If you're under the age of 35 years, you may need to fulfill some obligations to participate in some work, study, or volunteering. And talk to me if this is the case and you don't understand what's going on. I can chat to you individually. I think most people are probably not going to need to know anything about that. So I haven't included a lot of it here. You may be eligible for some additional payments if you work and study on the DSP. So you can get mobility allowance, which is an additional $120 to $170 per fortnight if you do not have NDIS. And also pensioner education supplement if you're engaging in tertiary education. Potentially secondary education. I have to double check that as well. But that's an additional small sum to kind of help with any educational costs as well. If you are working, you will need to report your work income to Centrelink. And once you're on the DSP, kind of ironically, you're actually allowed to work up to 29 hours per week, or up to the maximum income threshold before you lose the DSP. So if, for instance, a few years down the track after getting approved for the DSP, and you have not been working or you have been working but only a small handful of hours, and you're feeling better, you've been pacing really well, you can gradually increase your work as well without losing the DSP. So we're pretty much at the end of today's session. Here are some resources that are really helpful for you to create a successful application. So again, I've listed here DSP Help by Social Security Rights Victoria. They have some easy to understand resources for walking you through a DSP application and also what it would be like dealing with an appeal or rejection. So they are really handy. I've linked Centrelink's website that has all of the eligibility criteria, and they also kind of walk you step by step through addressing the medical evidence and giving you some examples and things like that as well. And then Emerge Australia have got this self-paced DSP application kind of educational module, which they've got like a half an hour presentation on there, but then also some other resources, including a doctor's letter template that you can use and adapt for your own medical evidence. And it's also really handy because they have tailored everything to ME/CFS and long COVID specifically. So if you've got those conditions, then it's got some good information about how to address medical evidence with those conditions. Um, so this recording will be available for you to go back and use. And if you'd like a handout of the slides, just contact me. I'll be happy to send them out to you. We do have a number of other services for people with ME/CFS, fibromyalgia, long COVID, and similar conditions. So reach out to us if you'd like to know more. And there's lots of resources free available on our website there as well. I will just stop the recording.